We make sure to record all of our sessions. And for those of you all who know, NetWorked is about connectivity. It's about interaction. And so if you are in a position where you can please show your face, show your smile, that's great. And if you're not, thank you very much for being an engaged and attentive listener. Our reactions are here for a reason as well. So if you hear something that you like, that you're excited about, go ahead and hit a reaction. We know that the work doesn't just begin and end in these convenings, but boy, these convenings are very helpful as we do the work of NetWorked. So with that, again, thank you all for joining us for today's topic, which I am pleased to be your featured presenter, as well as some really good colleagues of mine. So we are going to go ahead and hop right into our presentation for NetWorked. Again, NetWorked is brought to us by Network Kansas, E2, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas, and the Kansas Health Foundation. We appreciate the sponsorship support as we activate this network to connect unconnected networks and close gaps between people, information, and assets to develop pathways that boldly solve community challenges. That's why we begin our calls on a high note. Y'all are doing such incredible work, such difficult work, but many of us are making progress, and that is worth celebrating. So we always take a moment to just pause and celebrate one another in this work as we continue to be what? Do-gooders. So how we keep these engagements interactive, just a quick reminder, we want you to listen and really maximize this experience by understanding what is new learning for your organization through this conversation. Again, your organization may not be a diversity, equity, and inclusion organization, but there are principles that can apply to the work that you're doing. So listen for new learning. Think about questions. What is one question you have as a result of the information you're going to receive today? And most importantly, what will you do with the conversation? What will you do with the conversation? And what is today's conversation? It is about creating inclusion within entrepreneurial ecosystems. So we are going to dive into this place, and I get to wear multiple hats of mine. You all have known me as the strategic director of NetWorked, but you're going to hear a little bit more about the work that I do as it relates to my for-profit company, CML Collective. We are an inclusive graphic design and communication services company. I also am the founding president and CEO of Create Campaign. It is a minority business development nonprofit here in Wichita and has expanded to other markets. And of course, you know me through NetWorked, where I'm, again, very fortunate to work with many of you and get delighted to be introduced month to month to new folks in our network, and it is growing. And so I'm really excited about that work. Joining us today is Darius Wright. He is with Kansas Business Services. Darius is also a collaborator with myself on the Create campaign, where he serves as a member of our advisory board. You're going to hear a little bit more about Kansas Business Services in just a minute, but Darius is joining us, as well as Donna Wright, who is the principal over there at Kansas Business Services. Yes, we have some hand claps already. I love those reactions, because any of you who have been around entrepreneurship and government contracting, Donna Wright is an architect in progress in this area, and we are so fortunate to have her here today to be able to share with us some insights that can actually be practically used. I've queued you all up. Ms. Donna, Darrius, why don't you go ahead and share some of your background with Kansas Business Services?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you. And I've got an echo, so I'm going to try and see what I can do about that. So I see many friendly faces that I know. So it is so glad to see you all. Shelly's going, yeah, good to see you. Also, some of our other partners that we do work with. So a little bit about me. I have been in the inclusive entrepreneurial space for about 25 years now. I started out at one of the major aircraft companies as I led the supplier diversity team as a manager. And it really helped me to understand what inclusion means at a time when most folks really weren't paying attention to it. So I'm really happy about the history that I have. And I also spent about 10 years with a national not-for-profit called the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which is a council that actually their mission is to help corporations and other not-for-profit organizations increase their minority spend, women-owned spend with qualified, certified minority and women-owned business owners. I came on board with Kansas Business Services back in 2015 and actually came on board as the managing principal to a company that Darius founded. So Darius, I don't know, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. Basically, I've been a serial entrepreneur most of my life. At one point in time, I had the pleasure of being able to work for the National Minority Supplier Development Council's Mid-America Region Council, which covered Kansas, Kansas, Missouri, then Nebraska and Colorado under Donna Wright as an MBE recruitment manager. It was there during my time that I really got a chance to support more diverse businesses, that's racial, ethnic minorities, women-owned businesses, in terms of developing programs for them and connecting them as more like a third-party supply chain management, supply diversity supporter for major corporations across those states. So it was there that we also were able to connect with other businesses that we currently still do work for now. So it's just been a great opportunity for us to really come into the space and lend our expertise of decades of actually trying to include individuals into ecosystems of commerce.
Thank you for that cue up. And why don't you go ahead and share some impact highlights of Kansas Business Services?
Yeah, I'll just say this. So we've got three core competencies of our business. One is our organizational management, and it really is where we do a lot of general consulting and some specialized consulting, especially diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And then we do training and education and professional development. And then we do base business development. This is really about revenue generation. Our business development division is all about contracts and revenue generation, both in the government and the purchase and procurement of commercial entities. So just since we've been in existence, we've been able to help companies acquire over $30 million worth of contracts, both commercially and in government. It's a little bit higher than that, but that's a safe number. And this is directly by us either providing technical assistance or support, like actually writing proposals, pricing proposals, and performing project or program management and administration of those contracts that these individuals have. So that's been a great way for us to continue to work with women-owned small businesses, veteran-owned businesses, and any minority-owned businesses as well. So those are just some of the things that really tie into the work we do with diverse clients.
Thank you so much for providing that background. I wanted everyone to have a framing as we get ready to go into this topic. And we know that through NetWorked, we have heard a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a previous presentation. But here we wanted to really focus on this inclusion piece. As we look at the demographics of our country is diversifying. It is diversifying in a number of ways. And as such, being do-gooders, helping to build up communities, we are in the business of helping and activating solutions for people. And so if we are not prepared to understand the magnitude, the depth and breadth of working with various people, then we are missing an opportunity. And sometimes the difference in order to be proficient and comfortable in service is really taking time to invest in building understanding, building awareness, building knowledge. And so as we look at the opportunity to advance our communities through economic development with a particular focus on entrepreneurship, inclusion is an imperative. It is absolutely an imperative. So I wanted to share this framing as we begin to dive more deeply into today's conversation. And if you have some remarks that you'd like to put in the chat, again, join us. This is not a one-way conversation. This is definitely interactive. Before we go further though, when it comes to DEI, like I said, there are different levels of comfort. And so we're going to create for just a moment some principles so we can have this conversation and have it in a way that is most advantageous. Through my CMO collective company, whenever we discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, we do some ground setting. And so we're going to ground set with these principles that I'll carry over here. One is to listen to understand. Sometimes we listen to respond. Please listen to understand. Secondly, we want to assume positive intentions and extend grace. Okay. If there's a question that comes up and someone might not necessarily have the correct vocabulary, things like that, assume positive intentions. They're here to learn. They're here for a positive reason. Let's extend that grace. Because of that, we're going to dialogue authentically. That means disclaimers are not needed. So just in that example that I gave before, if you don't have the right vocabulary, but you have a pressing question, please do not apologize. Do not do a whole bunch of disclaimers. Say what you're going to say so we can have the conversation, right? Because we understand your intentions are positive. Question with sincerity. Okay, question with sincerity. This is very important for this particular conversation. This next one, we want to work beneath the surface to better impact systems. Programs are great. Initiatives are great. If we're going to truly build and enhance inclusion and entrepreneurship, and again, across other systems as well, we need to work at the systems level, not just a one-off, not just a good idea, not just a heritage month. It needs to be across systems. We may say some things where it may cause a trigger, or we may be asked a question where we may be triggered. We're going to ask that everyone leans into those triggers. Don't run from them, because to truly become more proficient in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to understand where there's some unsettling pieces within it and ask ourselves in that moment of being triggered, why do we feel this way? That is part of the learning and the understanding. Operate with clear intentions. Again, we're here to make progress. We're here to learn. Okay. And then most importantly, with all of this, we've got to activate the learning, which means we've got to do the work. Otherwise, it's just going to be a good conversation. And again, we don't talk for just talk's sake. So for a moment, now that we have our principles, let's define the vocabulary just so we're clear before we dive in. Is that okay? Thumbs up? All right. Diversity. Anyone have a good definition for diversity? You can put it in the chat. What's a good definition of diversity? Let's see who comes through in the chat. Who's going to hit us in the chat? Again, safe space. Define diversity. While someone's defining diversity, someone else tackle equality. What's equality? While equality is being tackled, who's going to take equity? Let's go ahead and put some definitions in the chat. How do we define it? How do we operate within it? How does your organization define it? It doesn't have to be personal definition of yours, but how does your organization define it? Thank you. I see Steve saying equality, level playing field. All right. And then lastly, inclusion. I need to see some definitions. You all got to work with this. Equity. Thank you, Romy. I see equity equals equal possibilities of access to services. That's awesome. One more, diversity, equity, diversity, equality, equity, inclusion. Diversity, see Ms. Donna's there, everyone is represented reasonably. Here we go, we've got the chat starting to get lit up. Thank you all. Equity from Diane, getting everyone to the same place. That's right. Nadia, thank you all. So as you can see, there are some definitions that are coming through. Here's how I like to discuss it as well. Diversity is difference, okay? Diversity is difference. If I was just to boil it down to one word, equality, it's about sameness, right? Everyone experiences things the same, or everyone gets the same. Equity is about fairness. Sometimes you don't need the same. Sometimes that playing field is not level. So you need to be able to have an experience or have opportunities that will help in the fairness piece of this, okay? And then inclusion is about belonging. I love what I'm seeing in the chat. Thank you all for raising your voices in the chat. Continue to do so as we move on. Is that all right? All right, now that we have an understanding, real quickly, you heard a little bit about Kansas Business Services, but now we're gonna dive in directly to Create Campaign and what we have experienced with inclusion in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And from that, we're going to pull out some truths. We're going to pull out some truths to us that may be applicable to you, because our purpose today is for us not only to explore the idea of inclusion within our entrepreneurship ecosystems, but to have some practical application for how we can enhance it in our organizations, how we can make some good trouble, for those who know that terminology, in our organizations in order to make a difference, again, at the systems level. So in Wichita in 2015, there were a number of groups that were convening, having good conversations just like this one about how do we move Wichita in this instance forward as it relates to entrepreneurship. And this group of leaders came together every 2 weeks to discuss what exists in the ecosystem, what more needs to happen. And these two particular leaders put a challenge, well, what would happen and what do we need to do to, at that particular time, engage more African Americans within the ecosystem? Point that I'm going to pull out as I'm telling the story. For our organizations, are we having those conversations? What questions are we asking within our organizations to see where we are with diversity, equity, and inclusion? We must have questions because actions stem from questions. Well, we thought we would get a group of African-American entrepreneurs in the same room with service professionals so that the connections could be made, because we know that with connections, there's an opportunity to activate relationships that can also create a better field for learning and discovery, right? Because you're creating an environment of trust. We thought we would get a cohort of 35 Black entrepreneurs to attend the half-day event where they met with professionals, where they heard from keynote speakers, where they attended workshops and breakouts. And then we wanted them not only to be, again, excited at the event, but we wanted them to build on those relationships outside of that event. And we wanted to track them to see if they actually did. So for example, Kansas Small Business Development Center was there with Marsha. Did they actually go and schedule a consultation following this event? Well, we did not get our intended cohort of 35 that day. We got 77 Black entrepreneurs that day. And many of them continued to call, and they were so excited. They wanted to be able to grow in their understanding, grow in their knowledge, but they needed a trusted advisor. They thought of me and those who they met in that space. Darius, I'm going to pause for just a second. And Ms. Donna, can you talk about what proximity does as it relates to creating inclusion in an entrepreneurship ecosystem? What does proximity do? How does it work? How does it benefit?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. There's something that I used to tell minority business owners just to kind of help them to level set their expectations. People typically do business with people that they know. How do you get to know someone that is in a position to give you opportunity with contracts? That comes through things that the CREATE campaign and other organizations actually do. Networking. I know that is a word that is overused quite a bit. Networking to me means showing your face, meeting new people, asking questions, being very curious about what organizations are looking for. Get to know buyers, get to know people that are in positions that can contract with you.
That is fantastic. Absolutely. It's about activating that network. It's also about going and meeting people where they are.
Absolutely.
Where they are. Okay, so see, we're telling the story and lifting out some principles all at once. Will that work for us? Let's keep going, because there was some other learning that continued during that time as well. So not only did we get, again, the entrepreneurs to come out, but we recognized that one event once a year was not enough. We needed to create, again, a system around them. Think about it in terms of, for those of you who like sports, if you have a child who loves sports, let's say basketball, since it's basketball season, right? Go Celtics. Hope I did not just get myself in trouble. I'm happy to see the 90s style of play back in action, but a child who loves basketball, there is a system to coach and support that child all the way through Biddy, all the way through the youth years. And if they're good enough, going to college and the NBA, where is our system for entrepreneurs? And where is our system even for diverse entrepreneurs? So we needed to hit it at multiple levels. Network Kansas was looking at it as related to funding, KSBDC, entrepreneurship education, CREATE campaign. We wanted to create a culturally relevant space where people could see themselves represented in leadership and also in presentation and programming and things of that nature, but recognize that we are part of an entrepreneurship ecosystem. And there is no reason for our Create campaign, which was an event in 2015 and grew to be a structured nonprofit in 2017, to try to be an SBA, for example. The SBA already existed. And so we wanted them to come, learn, but then go and activate the ecosystem on their behalf. There's that saying that we learned from the Kansas Leadership Center: the comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. We needed our entrepreneurs to get uncomfortable. And we also needed our service providers to get uncomfortable and learn again, what are maybe some unintended things that were happening as to why those connections weren't being made. Again, it goes back to the principle that we'll pull out. What questions are we asking inside of our organization? Real quickly, here's a highlight. Darius has presented at the Create Campaign Forum. Kansas Business Services has had a number of touch points in the organization, but just so you can see for yourself, there is no event in Wichita like this. Here's what we've got. This was from last year. Today is all about creating connections that help us start and grow our businesses. I see so many faces who were here in 2015, who year after year, you've gotten stronger, you've gotten bigger, you've gotten better, and we again have done it together. So this is our time.
The opportunity of a lifetime on average is passes us 3 times, right? By the time you're 21 on average, it's already passed you twice. If you're not focused on giving out your symbol of greatness, you won't see it.
The nerd I am, I look at the definition of collaboration. It says the action of working with someone to produce or create something. And I think that's what we're all trying to do.
We have to remember, it's not just one of us out here. We can't just one stand up and say, I'm going to do everything. It has to be teamwork. It has to be all of us on board. That is how we make change. That is how we're going to get to a better tomorrow.
I'll wake up every single day, 4:30 a.m. But I'm doing it with such an effort, and such a love, and such a passion for my mother, it's for my kids, for my wife, for my family. Sometimes you only get one moment. Make sure you make the most out of it, because you might not get it again. This is my moment, because I'm receiving my first award for business, but with my mother.
Sometimes you have to ask yourself, do you really want to win or just look good losing? It's real easy to get to that moment and say, you know what, this is good enough. And it's really not. We just don't want to do it anymore. I want to thank all of you, because you had a moment today where you decided that you wanted to win.
Entrepreneurs are the ones that have the power to transform their communities. There is no such thing as a self-made anybody. We only get as far as we are through transformational partnerships.
Create campaigners, I cannot tell you enough, it is our time. It is our time. And even when the window closes, guess what? We will have the foundation to move beyond the fads, beyond the trends, beyond the marches, beyond the movies, because we will just be. So for every single one of you, whether you traveled a block or traveled from Kansas City or New Jersey or Tulsa, to be here with us today, I want to say thank you so very much. More than 200 entrepreneurs on average attend the Create Campaign Forum, and it has become a signature event, not again out of show, but because we're listening to what entrepreneurs want, we're listening to our service providers, and we're collaborating in a space of authenticity. I'm going to take a moment and transition to the questions that I would like for us to really focus on and hear from. And as I'm doing so, be thinking of questions that you all have. The impact has been more than just an event. For Kansas Business Services, it's more than just several trainings. We are helping to launch strong minority-owned businesses in the state. We are activating capital on their behalf. We are helping them to structure. Again, if the reason why our economic landscape for minority business is lack of access to information and resources, we can solve that right here. We've got to be a bridge, and we've got to go, and we've got to meet, and we've got to connect. So as we look at, again, why this is important in an entrepreneurship ecosystem, I'm going to start off with that quote: a rising tide lifts all boats. we're looking at the economic potential of our communities, of our cities, and we are missing a key group of contributors, we are missing an opportunity. Ms. Donna, share why inclusion in entrepreneurship matters, and then we will go into some hows to close our formal presentation and begin to transition to Q&A.
Yeah, inclusion, why does it matter? It's not about the money all the time. I think from a corporation's standpoint, most are looking for best value at best cost. Understandable. But I do believe that as organizations begin to think about this word inclusion, it has to go beyond that. Yes, we want best value. Yes, we want best cost. But we also want locality. We want community building. We want to see people in our communities that are thriving. And so I think the questions that have to be asked, and I'll pitch this over to Darius, but the questions that organizations must ask themselves is why inclusion? Transparently, authentically, why? And then what is it that we are not doing? What more can we learn? Do we want to become a performative organization? You know, it's been really interesting when you talk about inclusion in ecosystems. I was thinking about the holiday that most African Americans celebrate, Juneteenth. And I was reading an article yesterday about a young man who is not young, but a young man that was wanting to trademark the name Juneteenth. My opinion would be that, oh, there's money to be made, right? If I could trademark this and if I could brand my products that I know that the African American community are going to buy, then why do that? Okay, so that's an example of what I would call performative inclusion. I think we have to ask ourselves a very authentic question about why we do what we do when it comes to building the ecosystem around diverse entrepreneurs. Darius, can you kind of talk a little bit also about maybe some of the things that we're doing in that area?
Yeah. So to start, I think that we generally get called for an initial consultation about either diversity, equity, inclusion. Mostly people understand that we have a background in supplier diversity, which means about the way and the terms and the amounts of which organizations are spending money for goods and services with diverse suppliers of all kinds. And the first thing that they tell us is that, hey, we want to increase our spend with minority businesses, with women-owned businesses and things like that. And we says, man, that sounds really good, right? Because being able to show that you're doing more is really, really good for most people. But then we asked the question, Donna brought up again, really why? And how much is enough? I think that when we think that we can solve a problem by just throwing money at it, that we realize that we're not making the real impact that we want to make. We're talking about making systematic or systemic and generational change. What we have noticed is even when we talk about, I think Susie posed a question about capital funding, about the success rates of businesses and entrepreneurs where they have finance, but also have technical assistance or training. Money can't be the only thing. And what we ask these organizations to consider is not just how much they're willing to spend, but are they willing to, and can they change policy? Can they change procedure? We ask them to take an internal look first, also because there's inward facing work that we do, there's DEI, and there's outward facing work that we do. And the outward facing work is the stuff that we get publicity for. It's the internal stuff that causes the degradation of our organizations, causes people to not stay. I'll give one example. We supported the Kansas Department of Administration, providing them some DEI consulting over the last year and a half or so, that focused on what is the state doing in order to increase awareness of DEI culture and move that culture forward for all Kansans. What we helped the organization to do was set up a number of listening sessions where we talked about the strategic plan of the state as it relates to DEI. What we began to realize is that the shared experience of many diverse individuals wasn't a good picture of what the state wanted to promote. And so that inward facing work is very important, because we can't go out to the community and say that we're doing this or try to do something, but then on the inside, we're still not doing the work ourselves. Eventually those things come to light, and there's a discontinuity between who we really are and even what we do. So that is one of the real linchpins of this work, is making sure that DEI is not a I'm doing type of thing. It's I am this type of thing. Are we becoming this? Because this includes everyone. Our definition for diversity is that everyone is reasonably represented. That can be. Right now, the only people who can be represented here on this call are the people who are here. But there are others who may be represented, and we want to make sure that when they're in the space that we know that they're represented.
I love that. I love that very much. So as we begin to transition to the practical, as I'm seeing questions as well start to come in through the chat, we like to, in terms of CML Collective, really help organizations as well look at diversity, equity, and inclusion through 3 lenses to begin with, and that's people, policy, and practices. If we're looking at people, for example, and representation, is your staff representing who you wish to serve? What about your leadership? What about the decision makers? We're not just talking about empowering people to do so, we're talking about sharing that power. So what do your people look like? Your policies. Your people can be diverse, but if there's no structure or support system that encourages inclusion and belonging, then again, I keep going back to the terms missed opportunities. What do your policies say? What are your policies maybe doing that help to make inclusion happen? And maybe what are they doing that's a barrier or a block to inclusion? What do your policies say? Where are the gaps in policies that need to be filled? And then you can have the people, you can have the policies, but if you don't put it to practice, then that too is a missed opportunity. What do our practices say around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And in order for people to truly understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't have to be anything more, it's just a shift in intention and energy of things that you would already do, then you can align it. So like KBS said, look at your strategic plans. What is important to your organizations? What is important to your organizations? What is driving the work of your organizations? Pulling in DEI there, because that's where it belongs. It doesn't belong separate. It belongs well within and embedded. Let's go to the chat. So a question that we have right here, and I really do appreciate this coming in, is, let's see, we've got a best practice from Kansas Business Services from, KSBDC from Susie. Thank you for putting it in there. But a question is, how do we develop authentic partnerships in those communities that have been historically marginalized and underinvested in by the greater community? It's a question that the Kansas Health Foundation is wrestling with right now. Donna, Darius, what would you say? How do you develop authentic partnerships in those communities that have been historically marginalized or under?
Yeah, go ahead, Darius.
Well, that's a tough one. Champions are always really, really good. I think that's the first thing, right? And I think the intentionality of letting people know that we are going to be utilizing or integrating the use of champions in our work, because we understand that not only do people do business with people they like, but people do business with people that look like them. And as human beings, that's just a reality. And so where there are ideas of mistrust with institutions or organizations or systems, it is important to find champions who understand and know the efficacy of an organization's work to create those bridges. That is something that in some recent work we were doing in KHF around food security that came up as a big question about how do we get the community to trust the work that we're trying to do? How do we let people know that we're not just being opportunistic and that we really are trying to do our part because of whatever privilege or whatever access that we have that we're trying to give to others? I think being upfront and intentional by saying, we haven't got it right, we're not going to get it right until we talk to end users who aren't like us, are outside of our systems, and that we're going to need people who understand us and understand the communities we're trying to reach to help us bridge those gaps, because we don't have it all. If we had it, we wouldn't be in this position. I think that just that straightforwardness to communities gives them the opportunity to say, okay, at least there's honesty and transparency here. And I think that that's one of the very first things we can do, is qualifying really where we are and even why we might be there and why we need help.
That's very good. Anything that you would add to that, Ms. Donna?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about something that I heard from KHF, and since Darius mentioned that, they said we want to support the work. We don't want to do the work because we don't feel like the work belongs with us. It belongs with the community. And I think that that's really, really important to not only be transparent with community members, but also let them know that they have something of value to add to the process. They have experience, a lived experience. And I think when we go into organizations thinking that we're going to solve their problem, can be somewhat off-putting. But it's more than you solving their problem. It's more around this collaborative mentality around many hands make the work lighter. And so I would add, allow the work to go back to the communities. Support in every way that you can, but get those champions, as Darius said, and utilize them and work alongside them.
That's wonderful. I would also add, when I was the cultural affairs reporter for the Wichita Eagle, just starting out on the beat, being a Wichita native, had a lot of wonderful connections in the African-American community, knew many in the Hispanic Latino community, but had no connections in the Asian community. And so I literally went to the phone book and looked for organizations that had Asian in the name. And that was bold, right? It was brave for me to do that because I was nervous about, well, what will they say? But I was vulnerable with them and told them, I'm the new cultural affairs reporter at the Eagle. Here's what I'm trying to do. I would like to know what your experience has been with the publication. Would you be willing to share with us? Because we want to make sure to do it differently. And we need your voice to help us do that. And not only did we ask them, but we honored and we shared with them how their voice impacted what was going on. And because of the transparency in that, there was grace that was extended when the paper did not always get it right, when I didn't get it right, but they knew the intention. And we were in relationship with one another that led to strong rapport that exists to this day. Trust champions vulnerability conversation, but don't just leave it at conversation. We've got to report back what we're doing with that conversation as well. There was another question in the chat, and if there's one more, I'll go ahead, or several more, go ahead and put them in the chat, because we're going to transition to the conclusion of our meeting. And while we have them, we want to be able to give voice to the answers, or at least some learning to these questions. All right, the next one up, Diane, thank you. Is who is the right person or people to define what DEI is within your organization? In creating definitions or policy, is everyone included in that work, or is it the usual suspects coming in and dictating what it looks like? Ooh, that is a question. Thank you for offering that, Ms. Donna.
That going like, wow, yeah. Just, I think one example in the diversity space, when we're working with larger companies in supply chain, sometimes they've got all of the right policies in place. However, the mind shift hasn't happened at leadership. And I think that when you ask the question around who are the right people, I think it has to be all inclusive. Leadership is responsible for leading the way. Doesn't mean it's their only job, but I do think that at some point, the leadership of an organization has to adopt the overall, looking for the right word, what the company is going to do. What are our goals? What is our mission? What is it that we do want to do? And then I do think that there has to be input from top to bottom. If there's someone who's really passionate around, they may not even have the title, but if they're passionate around this particular subject matter, those are the type of people I think that we have to get involved, and we have to learn from one another. So I don't think it's any one person's job to define, but it does start at the top.
I love that. And while Darius, I see your hand, I do want to share before you go, there's shared experience here. There's shared learning and understanding here. For the sake of the entire connection and collaboration here, if you have a learning, if you have a tidbit of advice around diversity, equity, and inclusion and advancing it in your organizations and ecosystems, go ahead and put it in the chat, please. Darius? I can't hear you, Darius, but you're not, it doesn't look like you're on mute. Can you try again?
Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
I don't know what happened. So when you talked about other people sharing their insights, no one group of people has ownership of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I want to caution us as we continue to move forward, or we think about how we do this work in our organizations. When we want to identify a person, it isn't always necessarily the best course of action to choose someone who automatically looks diverse. I know we talked about representation, but there's something to that as well. So sometimes people automatically jump and say, well, let's find a diverse person, but the work is still not there and it's just a diverse person. So now we've got kind of like a placeholder or a token program that's based on an individual. Programs can't be based on individuals, it has to be based on practice of an organization. So that's one really big thing. So in terms of the adaptive style of leadership that I mentioned to Diane, though, is that it's everybody's responsibility. We all have to recognize our place in the mess. We are all responsible in some regards to the places that we are now as a society and a community. And so that means everyone has an opinion and also has a place in that work. And everyone has to have an opportunity to respond to or talk about that work. Here's the point. People are having these water cooler conversations in your organization already. What they are not having is a structured conversation where we can take comments, where we can take, best practices, lesson learned, or oops, we shouldn't have done that, and translate that into actual action. So for an organization, it's better if the organization itself as a whole leads and provides that environment or that opportunity to hear from. And I know people are surveyed out and all that kind of stuff, but finding some way to interact with the people who are already having these conversations that the organizations as a whole are not privy to. They are people that we have in our organizations have an opinion. They have insights. We have to find how do we draw from this reservoir and wealth of resource that we have.
Thank you so much for those comments. Again, we covered a lot in just a short period of time, but I do want to bring us to this place when we think about what to walk away with from this conversation. Again, what question did it generate? What maybe aha did it lead to? And more importantly, what can you do with this conversation inside of your organizations? What we're learning with NetWorked is, again, the conversations don't stop at the convenings. So I encourage us, if there are some of you who are looking at, I saw some putting committees together, looking at how you're doing it as an organization, let's champion one another in this work, and let's continue the conversation and build with one another in this. There are some learnings that we all have experienced that can be of help to someone else. And just because you have tackled something doesn't mean that there's not more to learn if we are evolving as organizations. So with that, again, continue to put the best practices in. I will call for a final words from Ms. Donna and Mr. Darius. Final words for today.
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to stay curious. Stay curious about this work. Stay curious as to what your part of the work is, and even curious about who do you need to walk alongside you as you do this work, because no one can do it by themselves.
Very good. Darius?
I want to say this and encourage people about the idea of making progress. We did not get where we are in our country and our communities overnight. It took generations to build where we are. It likely will take generations to whittle out or move out the stuff that we don't like about who we are as communities. And I asked a question about what resources can we put behind it, and is this work, is it cost restrictive? I'll give an example. We were working with one of the major retail banks in the country around developing training that involved lived experience with its employees in some geographic regions. And very excited about the work. They had the blessing of their executives and things like that. And then it came time to the budget. And they had a very tall order. And we said, hey, this is what it would take to really get this running in our estimation. And that's way beyond what we were willing to spend. And I get that. Sometimes like a gut check to say, well, if we need to bring in professionals, or if we need to, because you can't ask the people who work there to spend extra time because they're already being paid to do a job. And now we're saddling them with 2 or 3 other jobs. I just want to say this about the cost of it. Our systems in our country have spared no expense to get us where we are today. And with that same idea in mind, we have to, of course, with budgets in mind, of course, we have to think about that is don't let the money be the first issue. Let the impact be the first issue. And then we can find ways to scale that impact across a budget. But let's not start with, oh, well, this is cost restrictive. Let's find a way to get what we want and do that over time. That's progress. And I believe that we can make progress.
Absolutely, we can. And we are experiencing some of that progress as well. That's why I shared, if you have experienced a best practice that you can contribute to this space, we definitely encourage it, and we'll continue to keep it going through our resource one-pagers and also through the continued conversation around this. Thank you for your engagement and intention to this particular topic. We figured out some strongholds as it relates to broadening credit access and capital criteria. We can do the same in many, many other areas. And so again, just like we started with the celebration, I'm going to encourage you to take a reflective moment to acknowledge where some gaps still exist, but also celebrate where there has been intentional effort of the investment of time, resources, talent, and even awareness and attention that your organizations are truly going to dive deeply in order to make change that goes beneath the surface. All right, so thank you all very much for your participation and engagement today. Just a few quick announcements before we get ready to move forward from our day. If you would like to connect with Kansas Business Services, of course, we'll make sure you all get the one-pager so you all can see how they are working and moving in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more so of how to create an inclusive entrepreneurship ecosystem. Remember, don't let the knowledge just stop with you. Who are the connectors? Who are the conveners? Who can contribute to the conversation? The champions, the catalysts, the creators. We are building a very robust library of a number of topics and resources this one notwithstanding, but definitely make sure to use the NetWorked website. That's networkedforchange.com, where again, you'll see past convenings, but also the resource library. So you don't have to try to remember everything you hear in the convenings. You can go back and access it, and most importantly, share and activate that knowledge. Details of the June convening are coming soon, and a sneak peek too. Just like we had a wonderful time at our in-person conference, we're going to be doing some clusters, some focus clusters that are in person that are going to dive deeply into conversation, into topics and resources so that we can activate them in different ways. So as you all have recommendations for NetWorked to increase the connectivity, continue to send them our way, because we are continuing to build upon the momentum established by each and every one of you. I want to thank you. Before we conclude, Steve, is there anything that you would like to share from Network Kansas before we officially conclude today's convening?
No, I'm just, thank you all for coming. I think it was a great conversation. I love the chat. The chat was really rolling, and just continue to, I'm excited about some things we're working on coming up in the upcoming convenings, and we're trying to take some of what we're doing and put it to action, and put maybe a few incentives in there down the road for organizations that don't normally work together to work together. So looking forward to sharing that with you in the future.
That's awesome. You all enjoy the rest of your day. Again, thank you for joining us. Take care.